Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and as you can see, the great Jim Valliant is with us again. Today, we're going to be discussing Christian ethics contra the objectivist ethics. Jim, welcome back.
It is wonderful to be here, my brother, as always. You'll notice I use a term that Christians have sort of attempted to appropriate through the years, brother and sister. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ. It's frequently used in the New Testament, by the way. But I like the idea, whatever the values are. When you do share values, you are my brother.
Yes, and I'm your depressed brother because I'm here in freezing cold Connecticut anticipating a snowstorm, whereas I was with you in sunny San Diego just a week ago.
Yes, where at least we don't shovel out of snow.
No, you don't. And you also have wonderful Mexican food.
That we do.
That was fantastic.
It was great to see you.
So I have an issue with even the idea of a broad Christian ethic. I mean, Jesus himself said it can be summed up in love the Lord your God with all his heart, with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, of course, do unto others as you do unto yourself. But he supposedly fulfills the law of the Jews. That's the Jewish ethics is entailed in the 613 commands of Moses. Jesus fulfills it. I don't really know what that means. Does it mean they no longer have to follow it? Does it mean they have to? He's just the embodiment. I really don't know. But I do know that it's been interpreted as Christians do not have to follow Mosaic law. So,
No, well,
well, that's what I'm going to ask you now. So, Nietzsche said that honesty is neither a part of the Socratic or Christian ethical tradition or ethical or Christian morality. And I kind of agree with Nietzsche on this one, but what is Christian ethics?
well, it depends on what you mean. If you mean the ethics that Christians follow today or believe in today, and Christianity has undergone significant changes over the last 2,000 years, or do you mean what's stated in the sacred texts of the New Testament, the Christian Bible? And that was faithfully adhered to, I would say, for at least the first 1,000 years, or maybe 1,500 years. Between 1,000 and 1,500 years of Christian rules, Christendom's rule over the former Roman Empire and what remained of the Roman Empire, they were consistent. And so one of the ways we can look to what is the substance of Christian ethics is the behavior of the most pious and Christian people according to the standards of the Dark and Middle Ages, where we really do see people sincerely trying to live up to that Christian ethic. And you could find no better example than in the vows that monks and nuns take. There are certain orders of people who set themselves apart to be particularly good Christians, and they take vows of celibacy, poverty, humility. Often this involves vows of silence. They would mortify the flesh. They would deprive their body of its basic needs on purpose. If you look at the life, for example, of St. Francis of Assisi, the founder of the Franciscan order, or if you look at the rule of St. Benedict, who lived 700 years earlier, you'll find similar vows. And this is pretty consistent with what you'll read in the New Testament, where Paul says, if you can be celibate, be celibate. If you can't, then get married. So they contain sex and all sexual urges to the institution of marriage. But it's preferable to be celibate. And Jesus said something similar about becoming a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven's sake, which by the way, the legend of a very early Christian origin took it literally, and he castrated himself. He became a literal eunuch for the kingdom of heaven's sake on Jesus Christ's advice. But Jesus was unequivocally opposed to monetary and, in fact, all earthly material ambition. In this way, it's an extreme version of Platonism. So the difference, get back to what you were saying about the law of Moses. Jesus himself is very explicit about this point. A rich young man walks up to him, according to the Gospels, and announces that he had kept all the commandments of Moses. What else do I need to obtain salvation? He asks Jesus. And Jesus, by implication, says, you did well. Just one more thing. Give away all of your money to the poor. And the rich young man, being a rich young man, sort of walked away. And Jesus says, see, it's as difficult for a rich person to enter into the kingdom of heaven as it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Elsewhere, Jesus says, do not be worried about what you wear or what you eat. Look at the birds. Look at the flowers. The birds don't toil or reap, and yet God feeds them. Look at the flowers. They don't need any to worry about their clothes, and yet look how gorgeous they are in their original creation, as it were. So Jesus is against things of this earth, focused on earthly ambition. Your focus should be on the kingdom of heaven, you see. And he's constantly on about that with his disciples and his listeners. What you need to be worried about is getting into heaven. That is the goal of Christian ethics. And it has nothing to do with success or happiness here on earth. In fact, we should sacrifice to the point of death if necessary. Jesus metaphorically refers to his own self-sacrificial death when he says, pick up your own cross and follow me. Now, it is unlikely that a living Jesus would ever said such a thing about his own execution, symbolically referring to his own crucifixion in his lifetime. So those are words that were later shoved into the mouth of Jesus by later gospel writers or their sources. But he makes the point, even if it requires death, you sacrifice for the next life. And unselfishness is a key to it. It's altruism on steroids. It's one of the most altruistic religious ethics on earth. There is, when you look at different religions and you look at different ethical systems, the ethical system of Christianity, as articulated by Paul and Jesus, is explicitly an altruistic one. So to answer your question about Mosaic law, Jesus says, you have heard it said, thou shalt not kill. I tell you that you've already sinned if you get angry. Woo! So what he's doing is he's oomping up, he's amplifying, modifying the Mosaic law in certain respects. You've heard it said, thou shalt not commit adultery. I tell you, if you feel lust in your heart, you've already sinned, in a very famous description. So Jesus is sort of increasing the requirements of the Mosaic law, but keying off of the Mosaic law, endorsing it. Now, there are certain other aspects, such as kosher diet, circumcision. Christianity does away with those requirements, as it does away with, by implication, the animal sacrifices found in Mosaic law. We have a new temple. We have a new sacrifice. Jesus is our substitute for all that. And so because we got Jesus, we no longer need to kill all those animals at the temple. Well, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD anyway. We needed a temple substitute. And so Jesus fills that role in. But as you can see, being open to Gentiles in a way that says you don't have to be circumcised. Now, the essence of the covenant of Abraham is circumcision. What makes you a member of a Hebrew, a member of the house of Israel, is this circumcision thing. And Jesus and St. Paul don't appear to be hot on it. In fact, St. Paul goes elaborately out of his way to make extensive arguments about it, while Jesus claims that a Roman centurion has greater faith than any Jew, presumably an uncircumcised Roman centurion. So there are elements of the Mosaic law which are done away with. But here you can see, and in a larger sense, you can see that Christianity is taking the Mosaic law and modifying it, and as we referred to earlier, modifying it through the lens of existing Greco-Roman philosophy. And so you'll hear the echoes of Platonism, you'll hear the echoes of Stoicism throughout the New Testament. I just happen to have here a couple of quotes that really show the altruistic nature of Christianity. St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Now, there couldn't be more straightforward an endorsement of altruism, right? Which you won't really find in Jewish sacred text, either the Torah or the Tanakh. Of course, famously in 1 Corinthians, and this is one of the, frankly, this is one of the most beautiful sections literally of Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians when he describes love. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered and keeps no record of wrongs. Um, in other words, it's about self-sacrifice. It's not about promoting your own interest. And to the degree that you can sacrifice like Jesus did. Now, look, Jesus is the model for Christian ethics. Be like Jesus, imitate Jesus. That is a theme you will hear repeatedly, not only in the New Testament, but in Christian writings throughout the first millennia of Christian rule over European civilization. And Jesus, of course, was humble, self-sacrificial. He behaved like a slave. For example, the Gospel of John has him washing the feet of the disciples. He's the master, he's the rabbi, and the disciples are just, well, the disciples. But he does the slave's task of going around and washing the feet of the disciples. You see, the king, Jesus, you see, under traditional Jewish prophecy, the Messiah was to be the king. He was to rule the world. And Christianity is trying to reorient this idea. Here you have got the Messiah, the anointed king, the son of David, and he's acting the role of a slave. And we, as good Christians, should imitate that in as altruistic a fashion as we can. Do unto others is really a Jewish idea, but it gets stretched into new proportions by Jesus.
Well, hold on 1 second. Let me just say, because it kind of isn't, right? Because what Hillel actually says is, don't do unto others things that you yourself found hateful, which is a call to restraint,
Yes.
Whereas do unto others is a call unto action.
Let me suggest that both are pretty empty in content. It depends upon what you subjectively already feel.
Sure,
And
that's true.
So both are basically content free, although you're correct that what's called the negative formulation of what is called the golden rule, which is do unto others, the negative formulation of Hillel is a softer one. It's avoid harming others as you wouldn't want to be harmed, as opposed to affirmatively doing what you'd like others to do to or for you. But nonetheless, we have to submit to the evildoer. We have to turn the other cheek when struck on the face. We've got to do good to those who curse us. We've got to be good to our enemies. Love your enemy. Now, if you could imagine a greater destruction and perversion of the very concept of love. If I love my enemies, then I've absolutely taken away any meaning for loving someone because of their virtues, because they're my friend, because we share values. Then what you're saying is, okay, this is an entirely different conception of love than an earthly conception of love. You got to love Adolf Hitler. Jews have to love Adolf Hitler. Now that is a perverse destruction, in my view, of the very concept of love, which is a recognition of value and virtue, the very opposite. And you were talking about Christianity versus objectivism. In every way, from its metaphysics and epistemology through its ethics and politics, the New Testament articulates a philosophy that is almost the perfect opposite of objectivism. It has a supernatural worldview, a totally mystical epistemology, where foolishness is wisdom, wisdom is foolishness. Don't even consider all that worldly stuff. Paul gets his visions through, revelation. He has these, like drug trip visions of flying up into the different levels of heaven. And it's through this mystic insight that Paul gets the real knowledge, and all worldly knowledge has to take a back seat to it. So metaphysics, epistemology, ethics. The ethics is not about selfishness as Ayn Rand's is. Now, Ayn Rand is not selfish in the traditional way people understand that word selfish. She has a principled view, for example, about honesty and justice and integrity and rationality, and so forth, and respect for other people's rights. She regards all those things as selfish, but you won't find a doctrine of rights. What you'll find is a doctrine of submission in Christianity. If I can contrast it, say, to the Quran, which is basically kill, kill, kill in the name of Allah, Jesus is saying submit, submit, submit. And it's all about getting along and being peaceful and submitting to the government. The government is God's appointed authority on earth,
Right.
according to Paul in Romans 13. So just submit and render unto Caesar and so forth. If you read my book, somewhere there, I guess there, yeah. If you read my book, I have an explanation as to why Christianity takes this extreme version of altruism and pacifism to extraordinary lengths. But even apart from the proximate historical cause, it's quite clear that Christianity is a doctrine of that. Don't defend yourself. I mean, turn the other cheek. If someone walks up to me and punches me on the face or slaps me in the face, what do? I can't run away. If he's bigger than me and has a gang, I can't even block the punch. And I certainly, even if I think I could win, punch back. I've got to say, oh, now hit this side. Please hit me again. You've got to be that submissive and shmoo-like to really live up to Christianity. And again, we can see monks and nuns and priests were under this very doctrine. They could not fight back. If someone attacked someone under religious orders, they simply have to submit and, if necessary, die. And they become, of course, martyrs. And nothing could be more glorious than being a Christianity revered martyrs above all, and right. They're the superheroes in Christian history. Is someone willing to casually give their life, not commit suicide? You can't do that, but to give their life in the name of the cause of Christianity is there could be no greater honor, and there could be no faster ticket to the kingdom of heaven than to give your life for the cause.
So, Jim, it's very ascetic, whereas the Jewish tradition of belief was not ascetic. For instance, they have the holiday of Purim where they feast and get drunk and whatnot, and they don't have all these sexual sort of I don't know what the word I'm looking for
is. Sex crimes were punished by stoning to death.
Sure,
execution. If you're homosexual, if you're committing adultery, you will the appropriate punishment under Mosaic law is execution, just as blasphemy is of execution.
Except a lot of that's explained away in the Talmud.
Well, that's the thing is
right, and that's the Jewish
yes.
faith. Now, what I want to know is there was in the New Testament we hear about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but there was a group or a sect of Judaism at the time that was more ascetic and was otherworldly more so than the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and that's the Essenes or the Essenes. I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Essenes.
But yeah, but was in your view Jesus more in line with them than he would be with the other two?
Yes. Well, by the time we reach a world in which the Roman era, in which Philo and Josephus are both describing these three different sects of Judaism, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes, Greek ideas have already, Plato changed every religion that he touched. And you're right. If you read the Torah, it's a lot more worldly. It's certainly not a submit to your enemy, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and we're going to kick ass at any enemy of Israel. Don't worry, you can do that. So it's a very different and much more worldly set of ideas, filtered through. But during the 2nd century BC and the 1st century BC, Judaism was itself being changed by Greek philosophy. And what you can say it's ascetic Christianity. Oh yeah, there are scholars who believe that the Greek philosophy of the Cynics. Now, don't use we have the word cynicism and being a cynic. That's different than the school of, just like pragmatism, right? You can be practical. Sometimes people just mean be practical when they say be pragmatic. But if I use pragmatism with a capital P, I mean the philosophy of William James and John Dewey. Similarly, here we have that same kind of relationship. It is cynicism is a ascetic. The Cynics believed in turning away from all material comfort, and there are scholars who believe that Christianity was influenced by the Greek school of philosophy known as Cynicism, the Cynics. And surely it was influenced by Stoicism, the doctrine of logos and eternal recurrence and what brings order to the world, and even many of its ethical teachings. And so I believe Stoicism is a significant influence on Christianity to a degree you won't see in Judaism. And more than that, Platonism. Now, Plato, as I say, did. There is no religion of the time that was not transformed by the touch of Plato. And you can see, for example, in the works of the first century Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, an integration of Platonic and Stoic ideas with Christianity. But that's a pretty high end. Those were, in effect, not the masses of Jews at the time. Philo is a pretty high end Greco-Roman type Jew who's eager to integrate Greek philosophy, especially the Greek philosophy that was so popular among the Romans, namely Stoicism and Platonism, with Judaism. That was a definite prologue to Christianity and its further and more complete integration of Platonism and Stoicism with the Jewish code of ethics, if you will, with some modifications. But if you want to look at, say the doctrine of simple self-defense, it was a sin for Christians to kill, even in self-defense, even in reasonable self-defense. So articulated St. Augustine in his, the most important Christian philosopher of the first 5 centuries was certainly St. Augustine of Hippo. And you can read in his works very clearly, okay, I know most people are going to kill in self-defense when they have to, but guess what, kids? When Jesus said, turn the other cheek, I don't read any exceptions there, my friends. That means you suck it up and die if necessary. And you can't kill in self-defense, even if the madman is coming at you with a knife saying, I'm going to kill you. But that only modified in the 13th century with Thomas Aquinas, who, looking to not the New Testament, he had to look to outside sources like Aristotle and natural law and observation of animals and other societies. And he said, no. It's perfectly natural for people to kill in self-defense if it's necessary and if they're not acting out of vengeance. But guess what? Even Thomas Aquinas said that the clergy, monks and nuns and priests, have to suck it up, and they cannot even kill in ordinary self-defense. This doctrine that, show you how far Christianity has come and changed. Most American Christians regard the Constitution, for example, or the Declaration of Independence as sort of the Third Testament and the embodiment of Christian ethics. Nothing could be farther from the truth than that. The founding fathers were very much like objectivism, diametrically opposite from Christian ethics and its advice. They engaged in a tax rebellion. They didn't love or submit to their enemies. They didn't render unto their Caesar. They didn't regard the government of Great Britain as the appointed agents of God on earth. They were, even a religious guy like Patrick Henry, who was a sincere Christian, said, give me liberty or give me death, without realizing that he's utterly contradicting the essence of Christianity as it was originally understood. Now, what has happened? The 17th and 18th centuries, the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment, and before that, even the Renaissance, when you can see Christian ethics in sort of going into full retreat. Look, if I tell you that Niccolo Machiavelli was a good Catholic writing in the 1500s, the early 1500s, you'd say to me, what? This guy's totally do what it takes to stay in power, or lie, cheat, steal, Prince. In his book, The Prince, he's advising the prince to, it's not based on Christian ethics. He's not telling him to turn the other cheek. He's not telling him to be honest. He's giving very hardcore pragmatic advice. But you can see where Catholicism is in the 1500s, as opposed to, say, just a couple of centuries earlier than that. Christians are turning their eyes away from the kingdom of God and here to the needs of earth. And the hypocrisy, say, of the Renaissance popes is their best feature. They've all got Michelangelo doing all these naked pictures on the roof and the back wall of the Pope's own private chapel. He's got all this nudity and whatnot, and cardinals would come in and they would say, Your Holiness, why are you letting Michelangelo paint all this? And the Pope's real response to Michelangelo was, go for it, it's gorgeous. And these popes had mistresses, and both sexes depending on the Pope, and so they were their cave-in let's put it this way, to this world was the best feature of the church during the Renaissance. But of course, that's partly what led to the Reformation. The Protestants in Northern Europe were saying, wait a minute, the church has completely turned its back on Augustinian hardcore philosophy, and they were going to go back to it. The Reformation was a back to basics movement in the face of Catholic Church hypocrisy, and that hypocrisy was the good part as far as I'm concerned. But that hypocrisy led to, mind you, Thomas Aquinas, the great Aristotelian, being named by the 16th century. Aristotelianism, a worldly philosophy, began with Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, and a little before him, actually. Aristotelian logic had been sneaking in the door with the early scholastics a couple centuries even before Aquinas. But Aquinas gave this new Greek philosophy an integration, Aristotle in particular, a full integration with Christianity. Now that's a complete contradiction, but that camel's nose under the tent, if you will, is precisely what led inexorably this growing influence of Aristotle, this worldly attitude about happiness being important, or observation of this world being important. For Augustine, for example, science was the lust of the eyes. We don't need this earthly science thing. In fact, faith is what decides questions that we don't understand. Aquinas, no. We have to prove with reason, with observation and Aristotelian logic, that God even exists before we can even get the whole theology thing off the ground. That was Thomas Aquinas. So that by the 1400s, you've got humanism. Now consider the difference there. Dante, the Italian poet who was writing a century earlier, is writing his epic poem of defining Christian metaphysics, purgatory, hell, heaven. By the 1400s, about a century later, the great Italian poets like Boccaccio and Petrarch are writing love poems. A very this worldly, they don't always have happy endings, they usually have sad endings, but it's this worldly. And that this worldly focus reaches its climax during the Renaissance and beyond. It opens up science. It opens up in the 17th century. It opens up a view of natural rights, which begins to take hold in the 17th century and is given its best expression in the works of John Locke, a sincere Christian, mind you, but who's doing things and saying things that would have horrified Christians for the previous 1,500 years, talking about things like slavery being wrong, when both in the Mosaic Law and the New Testament, slavery gets a full-throated defense. You've got Christian writers like John Locke giving really good arguments against slavery, or giving good arguments for religious tolerance. Now, wait a minute. There ain't nothing about religious tolerance in the New Testament, I can tell you. You won't find a doctrine of rights there. You'll find just the opposite. Obey the state. And if I were to say to John Locke, hey, wait a minute, what about Romans 13? I've got to obey the state as God's appointed agents on earth. Isn't that more like the divine right of kings than it is about individual freedom and tolerating people of different beliefs? So you can see how bad Christianity has compromised by, say, the late 17th century. By the late 18th century, you've got the American revolutionaries who have completely, basically ignored everything that St. Paul and Jesus said in the New Testament, and replaced it with an entirely different, this worldly ethics. Consider the Declaration of Independence. You've got a right to pursue your own happiness. That all men equally have this right to property. Property? Oh, that's materialistic, that's greedy, that's things of this earth, that's all that material stuff of the body that Jesus was condemning, right? Don't worry about what you eat, what you wear, don't worry about money. Pick up your own cross and follow me. Love your enemy in the meantime. It's a blessing if you're persecuted and executed by the bad guys. Okay, no, that kind of self-sacrifice is now completely sort of flushed out of the system, even among the American founding fathers, many of whom were deists, by the way, and who explicitly rejected Christianity, including men like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. But if, say, you were a sincere Christian, say like Patrick Henry or Sam Adams, who were pretty darn religious even for the time, they have completely lost touch with original Christian ethics. Fast forward a couple more centuries, and you've got 20th century American pastors and theologians arguing things like, money is great, Material success is wonderful. I remember one Becky Cole something whatever. She said, "Prosperity is the line that I remember. Prosperity is a divine right." What? That completely turns what Jesus said or what St. Paul said about
Sure it
money.
does.
The love of money is the root of all manner of evils, said Paul. That completely turns that upside down. Ayn Rand quotes the Reverend Ike, if you, who said, "The best way to help the poor is not to be one of them." Now, that is not original Christian thinking on the subject of poverty, much less a vow of poverty, which are consistent Christians were taking through the first millennia plus of Christian history. More than that, you'll even hear them defend sex. Oh, sex is a sacred gift from God. When sex is dirty, rotten, awful, why does Jesus have to be born of a virgin? Why does Paul recommend celibacy? Why does Jesus recommend becoming a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven's sake? Sex is a no naughty, and you should feel guilty about it as such. And so when you hear Christians today saying, "Oh, well, sex is part of God's sacred plan," that's totally naturalistic ethics of the, sort
Right.
of the revolution of Thomas Aquinas reaching a new height, if you will, of anti-Christian ethics. So what I would say is Christianity's operative ethics has dramatically changed, especially over the last 3 centuries. Dramatically.
So,
Uh,
Jim,
mm,
I recently interviewed a philosophy professor on ethics and history. And something that became very clear to me as we went through when we discussed Plato and the Stoics, Kant, Aristotle, was that when it came to Plato, the Stoics, and Kant, we had this duty ethics, this otherworldly ethics, it's this other world that's better. And with Aristotle, we had this focus on flourishing, on your happiness here. It was teleological, acting with purpose, to achieve certain ends that were best for yourself and those around you. And it's a similar thing when we get to Christianity and objectivism. And Christianity, of course, like you said, is influenced by Platonism, whereas objectivism is influenced by Aristotle. So, whereas Christianity is about sacrificing here so that you can have the paradise later on, objectivism is about acting in your own interest now so you can enjoy this life because it's all that we have. So I'd like to just go through a couple of the objectivist virtues, maybe, and we can see where Christianity or what a Christian take would be on them. For instance, honesty. Honesty in objectivism is about adherence to reality in the pursuit of one's own interest. That to make up stories or to lie to oneself, it's never in your interest to stray from what is real. Now, there are some takes in the New Testament where Jesus calls people hypocrites, for instance, but there's nothing explicit about always being honest that I can remember anyway. It's been some 20 years since I read the Bible. But so, how would you compare the two when it comes to the virtue of honesty?
there's someone I know who's also a person who writes about Christianity. He's doing a whole study of deception and lies in the New Testament. So you're absolutely correct. There's really no doctrine of honesty. And insofar as Jesus is complaining about hypocrites, what he's trying to emphasize is that no one is in a position to judge someone else, and that we should be, with one another, we should be ultimately forgiving of anything. And you can hear the echoes from the stuff I read, quotes I read. You don't hold grudges. You don't get angry. You don't judge people. Judge not, lest ye be judged, said Jesus. And don't worry about the splinter in your neighbor's eye when you got a big fat plank in your own. So what he's saying, or he who is without sin cast the first stone, in that famous scene where he interrupts the stoning of the sinning woman. But so in the text, his focus against hypocrisy is not a plea for integrity at all, but an assertion that we're all sinners and can't have integrity. So don't be a hypocrite, because there must be hypocrisy if you judge people at all. If you lack any kind of forgiveness, you are wrong. So we're all damn hypocrites, because none of us can live up to Christian ethics. We either have splinters or planks. And so I just accept that we're all sinners, and that's the way it goes. Objectivism does not say that. Objectivism says, look, only that which within your, like Aristotle. Aristotle said, look, it makes no sense to normatively evaluate a person or their actions if they didn't have a choice in the matter. It is only insofar as people have choice that ethics even kicks in. Ayn Rand picks that up and develops the idea even more consistently. And she says perfection is possible here on earth. Moral perfection, or if it's not possible, then it's some kind of mystic nonsense and it's a formula for guilt. I can only be praised or blamed for that which I have actually have the ability to control and chose. And so there we begin it. And look at this. It's not that the wisdom of the world is all BS, like the New Testament repeatedly asserts. She's saying that reality, there is no value to be gained by evading reality. So for her, honesty is a principled commitment to reality. Any attempt to gain a value by lying to someone else is always wrong in her view. That's her fidelity to reality. And there is no value. It's not even a value if you obtain something, money, fame, whatever. If I come up to a woman and say, hey, I got this scar in Vietnam, so sleep with me, and I get her to sleep with me, she's not making love to me. She's making love to this image of me. I'm not even getting the real visibility or the response to my virtue at all. And when it comes to, as you point out, when it comes to self-honesty, look, when does it ever make sense to lie to yourself and depart from reality? That's just no. If you're going to be rational, and see, she puts reason as her primary virtue. She is one of the reason is one of her three key moral values. And so, and all of ethics, as far as she's concerned, is the principled application of be rational to support your life here on earth, because human life is the standard and your own life should be its purpose. Well, that is a very Aristotelian. Yeah, there were Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Epicurus who, to them, the notion of anything other, and actually I'm going to give Plato some slack here. Plato did set off some horrific, through his theoretical approach to the subject, bad things. But Christian altruism, I think, would have even horrified Plato. But in any case, the Greeks have a much more this worldly, it's for your own happiness at the end of the day. It's not to get into some supernatural dimension, as Christianity would have it, or in obedience to the categorical imperative, like Immanuel Kant would have it. Ethics is about succeeding here on earth. And Aristotle, the whole implication, and Aristotle just assumed it. Aristotle kind of is assuming that once you know what's in your long-term self-interest, you do it. So he's giving you advice on how to succeed here on earth. And his concept, people call it the pursuit of happiness. The Greek concept of eudaimonia is even richer than that. It involves success, the achievement of your values kind of happiness. And so what he's giving you is good advice on things like beautiful advice, for example, on the selfish nature of friendship. And what we get out of friendship, the selfish value that others represent to us. He's giving you advice on how to be happy and successful here on earth. And he doesn't even feel the need. Ayn Rand justifies that with life as the standard, and happiness is a goal. Aristotle takes that for granted. He doesn't need some meta-ethical justification for that. He just assumes that once you know what would work, succeed, and make you happy, that's the standard I'm going by when I give you all this advice, about being a good person.
So, Jim, we mentioned hypocrisy and how it's basically a necessary component in the Christian world because no one's perfect. Now, in objectivism, we have the virtues of integrity, which is loyalty to rational principles, and also pride, which is the pursuit of moral perfection. Both of those virtues are contrary to the entire Christian worldview because integrity, loyalty to principles is impossible. And if that being the case, of course, moral perfection is impossible.
Yeah, moral judgment that's required. Moral judgment of myself and anyone else is simply what we would call integrity, is simply impossible. And so we must be promiscuously forgiving of all. How dare you judge anyone else? How dare you not forgive anyone who does wrong to you? How dare you throw the first stone, as it were, whatever the sin involved is. So integrity is not a feature. In fact, quite the opposite. We have to be accepting and understanding of people's lack of integrity. The fact that none of us is perfect. No one is good but God, says Jesus. And so integrity is right off the, as Ayn Rand understands it, it is impossible. So don't even try.
As
Now,
is justice,
huh,
right? Because
exactly.
everything's forgiven.
Everything must be forgiven. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Justice is out the window, out the window. Integrity, out the window. Productiveness, who cares? They don't toil. Look at the birds. They don't toil or reap, and yet our Heavenly Father feeds them. Okay, so productiveness, justice, integrity, but the killer, the coup de grace is the one you brought up as well. Pride. What? Moral ambitiousness. What? I'm capable of perfection and I should be perfect. What? That flies in the face, really, of a deeper doctrine that Christianity inherits from Plato. Nothing in this corrupt material world can be perfect, including and especially human beings. Perfection is simply that's connected to the hypocrisy integrity thing as well. Nothing in this world can be perfect. In Ayn Rand's first philosophical notes that she wrote when she was still in her 20s, mind you, she posited, in effect, that religion was the cause of hypocrisy and dishonesty as such. Because once you posit the existence of a supernatural, you have divided the real from the ideal. And that division, that dichotomy between the morally ideal and what must be real is built in. And so she says lies and hypocrisy are built in by the very essence of religion. Once you posit God or the supernatural or gods, religion is the cause of this ability for some people to act one way and preach another. And the essence of it, that hypocrisy, that theory practice dichotomy, is actually generated by a belief in the supernatural, she asserted. Very profound insight, in my view. If you have a supernatural, if this world isn't it, then if this world is it, then how could there be a theory practice dichotomy? What would be good in theory and work in theory, but not work in practice? There'd be no such division that would even come up. You'd be like Aristotle. You'd sort of assume that if you knew what was good for you, you'd do it. And Ayn Rand doesn't make that assumption. Why? Because she was aware of the history of Christianity and altruism. She knew that some people, given the right moral education, given the right ideological condition, are perfectly happy to commit suicide the long way or the slow way in the name of some otherworldly ethical belief. But it's an ethical belief. It's an ethical ideal. They're a hero if they are a Christian martyr. They're a hero if they suffer. In fact, to the extent that you suffer for your belief, you're a good person. For Ayn Rand, that's horrific. And so she has the hero in Atlas Shrugged said, morality should not teach you to suffer and die, but to enjoy life and live. It's living life that ethics is all about for her. Life here on earth. You know, before she even called it objectivism, before she even gave it a label, and she knew she'd developed a whole system of thought, she simply called her own philosophy a philosophy for living on earth, which by itself would set an agenda that is the diametrical opposite of the intention of Christianity. Jesus, as I say, he is repeatedly on about the kingdom of heaven, getting into the kingdom of heaven. Who cares about this life on earth? If you have to be poor, if you have to suffer, if you have to, right? Poverty and celibacy are no problem. And you know, Michael, I have to say there's something to that. If I was a sincere Christian, and I really believed all that stuff, I could knock out 80 years here on earth or so of total perfection. I really could. I think I could have joined a monastery and given all my money to the poor and taken vows of celibacy. Now, that would have been rough, I grant you. I love making love. And so to me, it's horrifying to even think this way. But I think the funny thing is that I think idealistic people are like that. They want to know what's right and wrong in the grand scheme of things. And people are capable of grotesque self-sacrifice. And even in the Enlightenment, and this is where we got into trouble, as Ayn Rand also observed, the Enlightenment began to try and do philosophy. Mostly these were Christian guys. Spinoza was a Jew, but mostly the great philosophers of the 17th and 18th centuries are still doing their own riffs on the religions. They may call themselves Christians, but they're developing whole ideas that are quite independent of Christian metaphysics and ethics. John Locke is a good example, as I cited earlier. Kant tried to reverse that trend. He tried to defend, in effect, the Christian worldview without any Christian argumentation. And so what he's going to do, he's going to prove with reason and science how you can't rely upon worldly knowledge and how you must, in effect, ignore all consequences to do your duty. And that duty will look very similar to Christian ethics when Kant is done with what he thinks the categorical imperative implies for humans. Rescuing the religious worldview from the rational onslaught of the Enlightenment was what
Jim,
Kant
I'm
did.
glad you used that word,
I'm sorry?
rational. I'm glad you used the word just now, rational, because it seems to me that the fundamental difference between objectivist ethics and Christian ethics. Now, one could argue that the fundamental difference is metaphysics, right? The supremacy of existence versus the supremacy of consciousness. And I think there's some truth to that, but the problem is recognizing that requires what I would say is the fundamental difference, and that's reason versus faith. In objectivism, the fundamental virtue is rationality, the practice of reason. In Christianity, it's having faith. And the two are so different that they just lead to completely different worldviews, modes of action, methods of attaining happiness. I mean, like you said, if I fully believed that this was only 80 years, whereas I'm going to spend eternity somewhere else, I think I could do a lot of things here, give up plenty, because this eternity thing's looking pretty,
I think you and I
pretty
could probably knock
appealing.
it out of the park.
Yeah, but I understand that everything I have is right here,
Ah,
and that anything that I miss out on here is just missed out on, and I don't get it back. It's gone.
yeah. Boy, a famous French mathematician and philosopher named Pascal said, "Hey, look, when I'm looking at it, Pascal's famous wager.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
idiotic.
well, he's really missing something very, very profound. He's saying, look, if I'm Christian here, at least I get a chance, and you follow Christian ethics here, I get a chance to get into heaven if I believe. If I don't believe, and belief is the sine qua non of salvation. Jesus famously in John 3:16, whosoever believes in Jesus shall not perish. Now, if you don't believe, you're condemned, and condemned to an eternity in a lake of fire. Pascal says, wait a minute, if I believe and try to live up to Christianity, at least I have a shot at immortality. And besides, what harm does it do me in the meantime? Boy, does he get that wrong. If I spend a minute, if I spend a second on trying to get into a supernatural dimension, that is a second taken from my very finite life. Now that I'm in my 60s, I have a whole different take on how precious each one of those moments are. And to whatever extent I do devote myself to Christian ethics is time taken away from success and happiness here on earth, making the most of my life here on earth, which is all that I have. So Pascal, you got the wager wrong. It's totally sacrifice this life or devote myself to the next, or devote myself to this life. And those are the choices. And they're an either or choice. And you either pursue happiness here on earth for the sake of your own long-term self-interest. I mean, we do have long-term goals. It's not immediate pleasure that we're seeking. We're not hedonists as objectivists, but it is one's long-term, guiltless, non-contradictory joy that you're looking for. That is to say, the achievement of values here on earth is what it's all about for Ayn Rand and Aristotle by implication. Yeah.
So, objectivism is a philosophy for life here on earth. I think that's a perfect place to close. I love you, Jim. Tell the people where they can find you.
I love you too, my brother. We're going to sound, doesn't it sound creepy Christian? In any case, I do love you too, my brother, because we share earthly values. Where they can find me. Here, because for some reason you keep inviting me back. So here is a good place, but I'm very active on Facebook. And there I'm answering questions about my book on Christianity and objectivism on an almost daily basis. So come hit me up at Facebook. You can find me at multiple objectivist sites like Ayn Rand, the John Galt line, the Leonard Peikoff study and appreciation page, or just my personal page. So hit me up with a message if you have any questions. I'm there almost every day.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
For
you.
now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Till next time.